This episode of The Deep Dive is brought to you by Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. A series of AI-narrated meditations designed to feed your intellect and challenge conventional wisdom.
Yes.
Each bite-sized episode is packed with thought-provoking ideas, surprising facts, and insightful analysis, all designed to spark your curiosity and expand your understanding of the world. We always hear that more speech is the best way to counter bad speech. But what happens when the rules change in a way that lets powerful people silence those who disagree with them without causing a big First Amendment fight?
That's the really important question we're diving into today. You've gathered a really fascinating set of sources about the changes happening in American libel law. It's going beyond just protecting someone's reputation and could really change who has the power to the press, the public, or the people in charge.
Exactly. The research you've collected looks at everything from really important Supreme Court cases to some big legal battles that have happened recently. It shows us that libel law is becoming a more common and potentially dangerous battleground when it comes to fighting for free speech. Our goal today is to break down these complicated legal issues, understand the new tactics being used, and figure out what it all means for our ability to speak truth to power.
And this isn't just something that affects journalists, right? It affects anyone who might want to criticize or question people in positions of authority.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To really get this, I think we need to look at where it all started. At its heart, libel is about protecting a person's reputation from lies that could hurt them. And this isn't some new idea.
No, definitely not. Your sources actually remind us that arguments about reputation have been around for a long time, and sometimes things got pretty brutal.
Right.
Like, way before courtrooms even existed, there were duels and even physical punishments.
Yeah.
And when we as a society decided to use legal ways to deal with these arguments, like paying money to someone whose reputation was hurt by lies, that was a big step forward for a civilized society.
Absolutely. It showed that we valued someone's reputation.
Right.
And this historical view is important because it helps us understand what Murder the Truth calls an under-the-radar legal movement.
Okay, that sounds kind of ominous, Murder the Truth. What exactly is this movement trying to do?
Well, according to the author, David Enrich, this movement is basically taking libel law and using it as a weapon. It's like a planned strategy that's been growing alongside all the worry about where the country's politics are headed.
Okay, so you say weaponizing libel law. What does that look like in practice? Like, how is that actually happening?
Well, the first thing they usually say is that they want to protect innocent people from being falsely accused. They'll say that it's almost impossible for someone to win a libel lawsuit, which just encourages people to spread lies and misinformation. But, as your source points out, there have been cases where people who spread lies were successfully sued for libel.
Yeah.
The book argues that the real goal, and this is a quote from a British lawmaker, is to murder the truth by basically turning the legal system into a minefield that scares journalists away from doing important reporting.
So it's not about getting justice for someone who's been genuinely hurt. It's more about preventing any criticism from even being voiced in the first place.
Yeah, that's the main argument.
I see.
And to see how this idea gained traction, we should look at a really important case in American legal history, New York Times v. Sullivan.
Right, Sullivan, everyone always talks about that case as a cornerstone of press freedom. What exactly was it about, and why was it so important?
The case started when L.B. Sullivan, he was a police commissioner in Montgomery, Alabama, decided to sue the New York Times because they ran an advertisement that had a few minor factual errors in it. The ad was about the mistreatment of civil rights activists. Now, the trial itself took place in a very segregated environment, and the judge had some Confederate sympathies and let's just say a questionable personal history, as your source details.
Wow, the context of the trial itself already sounds kind of biased.
It really does. So it was Justice Brennan who wrote the opinion for the Supreme Court, and he ended up establishing the actual malice standard for libel cases that involved public officials. What this means is that Sullivan had to prove that the Times actually knew the things they printed were false, or that they acted recklessly without caring about whether it was true or not.
So it wasn't enough to show they were just simple mistakes.
Exactly. They had to show that the Times was deliberately or recklessly ignoring the truth.
So basically, it put a big burden of proof on the public official who was filing the lawsuit.
Right, and they did this because they realized that having open debates about public officials is really important in a democracy.
Right, makes sense.
And they felt that even if there was criticism, it shouldn't be shut down by lawsuits over small inaccuracies. Sullivan trying to use libel law to stop this debate actually made the case even more important as a protection for American press freedom.
Okay, so they set up this actual malice standard, but that wasn't just for public officials in the long run, right?
No, it actually expanded. So in 1967, we had the Curtis Publishing Butts case, and that extended this standard to public figures.
Okay.
And that includes people like big-time business leaders and celebrities. The court recognized that the public has a genuine interest in what these people do. The Chief Justice at the time, Chief Justice Warren, actually emphasized that the public has a legitimate and substantial interest in how these public figures conduct themselves.
Right, because they have a lot of influence. Okay, so then what about the Gertz v. Robert Welch, Inc. decision?
That came along in 1974, and that broadened things even further. Gertz expanded the definition to include limited-purpose public figures.
Limited-purpose public figures.
Right. These are folks who kind of jump into specific public controversies, like maybe they speak out about a particular issue. And the court even said that in some rare cases, there might even be involuntary public figures, like an air traffic controller who suddenly finds themselves in the middle of a news story because of a major incident. But the main idea stayed the same. People in the public eye should be open to scrutiny, even if that means there might be some accidental factual errors in the reporting. And of course, it's important to remember that private individuals still only had to prove negligence, which is a much lower standard, to win a libel suit.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like we're trying to find a balance between protecting people's reputations and allowing for open discussion about people and things that affect the public.
Yeah, exactly. So Sullivan and all these other cases create a pretty good shield for journalists who are investigating powerful people as long as they made a real effort to get the facts right. But unfortunately, your sources seem to suggest that this protection is under attack. You know, it reminds me a little bit of how some YouTube channels, like Mindful Moments, will analyze really complicated audiobooks and try to find positive interpretations even when the story is tough.
Yeah, like looking for the deeper meaning.
Exactly.
Okay.
So here we are looking at a challenging situation in the legal world, trying to really understand what it could mean for us.
Okay, so back to this under-the-radar legal movement. How exactly are they trying to chip away at these protections that we've talked about?
Well, they're using a mix of super aggressive legal tactics, and they're also trying to challenge those old legal precedents themselves. A good example is when Donald Trump kept saying he wanted to open up our libel laws to make it easier to sue news organizations that he thought were being dishonest. Now, as your source explains, this kind of talk isn't totally new, but with Trump, it felt like a much bigger escalation.
Yeah, it was like a direct attack on the idea that the press should be able to hold powerful people accountable.
Right. And this ties directly into Peter Thiel funding Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker.
Right.
This wasn't just about a celebrity wanting to protect his privacy after a sex tape was released. A lot of people saw it as a strategic move to ruin Gawker financially because Thiel didn't like what they were publishing.
I see. Yeah, Gawker was known for being pretty controversial. So how did the legal strategy in the Hogan case work? How did they go about it?
Well, Charles Harder, the lawyer leading Hogan's case, used a really wide-ranging strategy. His team went through years of Gawker's articles looking for anything they could use against them, not just things related to the sex tape. They even went so far as to find people who'd been written about negatively by Gawker, offering to represent them in lawsuits. We even found out later that Thiel was secretly paying for a bunch of different lawsuits against Gawker.
Wow, so it wasn't really about one specific complaint. It was like they were trying to use the legal system to just shut down the entire media organization.
Exactly. And the outcome of the Hogan v. Gawker case, you know, the huge judgment against Gawker and them going bankrupt, shows what can happen when someone with a lot of money uses these kinds of legal tactics. And it turned out that the judge in that case had a background that some people thought made her likely to side with the person suing, and Thiel himself was said to have bragged about how well things turned out for him.
Wow. And, you know, even though Gawker might have been controversial, that kind of outcome sends a chilling message to any media outlet that's willing to be critical of powerful people or institutions.
Definitely. It's like a warning shot. And the impact wasn't just limited to Gawker.
Right.
What happened to Tector, a smaller online news platform, really shows this chilling effect in action.
Okay.
Even though Tector had libel insurance, they still ended up spending a ton of money to defend themselves against a lawsuit. The stress and the financial strain led them to publish less because they were so worried about getting sued again. Their founder even said that they were actually in a better position than some individual journalists who don't have the support of a bigger organization.
Yeah, that's a good point. It shows how these lawsuits can really hurt smaller news organizations that don't have a lot of money to fight back.
Right. And all of this brings us to the idea of strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAPPs. Your source defines these lawsuits as basically intimidation tactics disguised as real lawsuits.
Okay.
The whole point is to scare critics into silence, not by actually winning the case in court, but by making it so expensive and time-consuming to defend themselves that they just give up.
So the goal of a SLAPP suit isn't to win on the legal merits, but to just drain the other side's resources and scare them and anyone else who might speak out.
Exactly. A really clear example is the lawsuit that Chemrisk filed against Cherry Foytlin and Karen Savage.
Okay, who are they?
These two women were criticizing Chemrisk's connections to BP after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Oh.
So you have these people raising legitimate concerns about the environment, and suddenly they're slapped with a defamation lawsuit by a big, powerful corporation. Of course, they could barely afford lawyers. It really seemed like Chemrisk wanted to make an example out of them to scare other people from speaking out. And the interesting thing is that Clare Locke, the law firm that went after Rolling Stone, was also involved in this case.
Okay, yeah, Clare Locke seems to pop up in a lot of these high-profile legal fights. What's their deal?
They represent a lot of really powerful and controversial people like Peter Nygard, Elon Musk, Oleg Deripaska, who is a Russian oligarch, and even the Sackler family. And your source talks about how they use these really threatening legal letters to try and control what gets reported. They even went after Patrick Radden Keefe, trying to discredit his book about the Sacklers. It's also interesting that the Justice Department decided that Clare Locke didn't need to register under AFERA, even though they were representing Deripaska. That decision raised a few eyebrows, because AFERA is supposed to make sure foreign influence is transparent.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a pattern here. We have powerful individuals and corporations using their money and aggressive legal tactics to push back against any kind of criticism or negative reporting, and it's often having the effect of silencing the people who are trying to hold them accountable.
Exactly. And on top of all that, there's this intellectual and political movement that's trying to dismantle the legal protections for free speech in these defamation cases, particularly targeting the Sullivan precedent.
So it's not just about these individual cases. It's like there's a bigger, more organized effort to change the rules of the game entirely.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Wow.
So in the McKee v. Cosby case, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a dissent where he straight up said that the Sullivan decision and all the cases that came after it were wrongly decided, and that they don't really fit with how the Constitution was originally understood. And it's interesting, the timing of his dissent came right when Trump was attacking the media constantly, and his wife was deeply involved in politics. It makes you think.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Thomas. Justice Gorsuch has also expressed doubts about the Sullivan standard, hasn't he?
He has. In one opinion, he cited data that shows the number of libel trials involving media organizations is going down and that it's getting harder to win these cases on appeal. He used this to suggest that Sullivan has basically become a free pass for the press. He even said something about how maybe not fact-checking very carefully is actually a better legal strategy now, which is a really worrying thought.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of backwards. Like it's saying that being sloppy with your reporting might actually protect you legally, which is scary.
Exactly. It's a dangerous idea. And this questioning of Sullivan isn't limited to the Supreme Court. It's happening all over the conservative legal movement. Groups like the Heritage Foundation and the Claremont Institute are having events and publishing reports arguing that we need to make it harder for people to win libel cases, which could open the door for challenging Sullivan at the Supreme Court. And then we have Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, putting together a panel specifically to talk about defamation law. And this panel is full of people who want to overturn Sullivan. They say the current laws are unfair to people who claim they've been defamed. So this is clearly a political issue, too.
It really is. It's not just happening in courtrooms. It's a part of a larger political movement.
And even people who used to strongly defend Sullivan, people like Alan Dershowitz, a well-known legal scholar, are starting to change their minds. He's saying that cancel culture is actually a bigger threat to free speech now, which suggests that the ground might be shifting even among more established legal voices.
It's kind of a double whammy, isn't it? You have these aggressive legal strategies, and then you have this broader push to change the law itself. And it seems like local journalism is getting hit especially hard.
It is. Local news outlets are already struggling financially, and they're much more vulnerable to these kinds of legal threats.
Right.
The Wausau pilot and review case in Wisconsin is a perfect example.
Okay, what happened there?
So this is a small independent newspaper, and they got sued by a local politician because they printed a story that said he used a racial slur. Even though the newspaper ended up winning the case because they showed there was no actual malice, the lawsuit still cost them a fortune, and they didn't even have libel insurance to help cover the expenses. They almost went out of business because of it. And the crazy thing is, the politician appealed the decision, arguing that even though he was an elected official, he should be treated as a private citizen for this case.
Wow. So he was trying to use a loophole in the law to make it easier to sue them.
Exactly. It just shows how far people are willing to go to silence their critics. And even though the newspaper won, the experience really made the editor think twice about doing any more investigative reporting. The Carroll Times-Herald case in Iowa is even worse.
Oh no, what happened?
A police officer sued them because they published a story about some alleged misconduct. And it was all true, but he still sued for libel. The newspaper ended up losing so much money they had to cut staff and sell the paper. It was a family-owned paper for years and years, but they had to let it go. The owner was completely devastated. He even thought about suicide. And after the paper was sold, they basically stopped doing any serious investigative journalism.
Wow. Those stories are so sad. It's like these lawsuits are being used to silence local news and prevent them from holding people accountable, especially in smaller communities where they might be the only ones doing that kind of reporting.
Exactly. It's a huge problem. And it's not just about mistakes in reporting. The Colorado Springs Gazette shows that even when you're reporting on really important public issues like problems with a big development project, you can still get threatened with lawsuits.
Yeah.
So the Gazette was reporting on concerns about the construction and environmental impact of this big development project.
Yeah.
And the developer, who had a lot of money and power, started threatening to sue them, saying they were being biased and reckless. Even though the Gazette continued reporting, they ended up settling the case and retracting some of their reporting.
So basically they were bullied into silence.
Right. And then there's what happened to NHPR, a public radio station.
Okay, what was that about?
They did a story about sexual misconduct allegations against this guy, Eric Spofford.
Okay.
And even though the reporting was accurate, Spofford started sending them threatening letters, and someone even vandalized the reporter's home. The station stood by their reporting, saying Spofford was a public figure and they were just reporting the truth. The judge ended up dismissing the case, but the whole experience was really scary for everyone involved.
It's a scary situation, especially for reporters who are just trying to do their job.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we have to talk about the Dominion Voting Systems v. Fox News case. Everyone was watching that one.
Oh, yeah. Dominion sued Fox News for broadcasting those conspiracy theories about the 2020 election.
Yeah. Exactly. Dominion said that Fox knew the stuff they were saying about the election was false, but they kept saying it anyway to boost their ratings. Fox tried to defend themselves by saying they were just reporting on newsworthy allegations, claiming it was protected by the First Amendment.
Right.
But before the trial even started, the judge, Judge Davis, ruled that Fox had actually broadcast false information. That really hurt Fox's case.
Yeah, that basically confirmed that they were spreading lies. So what happened next?
Well, at the very last minute, they settled the case, avoiding a trial that would have really dug into the whole actual malice issue and how much money Dominion should get in damages.
So they basically paid a lot of money to make the case go away. What does that tell us?
I think it says that Fox News knew they were in a lot of trouble. Even though they're a big, powerful media company, they still decided it was better to settle than to risk a public trial and a potential verdict that could have really damaged their reputation. The size of the settlement alone suggests they were really worried about the consequences.
Makes sense. And while we're on the topic of high-profile libel cases, we should also talk about the Sarah Palin v. New York Times case.
Oh, yeah, that one got a lot of attention, too. Palin sued the Times over an editorial they wrote that wrongly linked her political action committee to the shooting of Gabby Giffords. The judge in that case, Judge Rakoff, threw the case out, saying Palin hadn't proven that the Times acted with actual malice. He even told the jury what he'd decided before they got a chance to reach their own verdict.
Oh, wow. He didn't even let the jury deliberate.
Well, they did deliberate, but he told them his decision beforehand, which is unusual, and the jury ended up agreeing with him, finding that the Times wasn't liable. But then the case went to an appeals court, and they said that Judge Rakoff had messed up, so they ordered a new trial.
Okay, so even though she lost the first time around, she got another chance. What's the bigger picture here? What does the Palin case tell us about how libel law is changing?
On the surface, it seems like a case about Sarah Palin's reputation, but a lot of legal experts think it's about something bigger. They think it's part of a strategy to weaken the Sullivan standard and make it easier for public figures to win these libel suits. And the fact that lawyers who have openly criticized Sullivan were involved in the case makes this theory even more believable.
Okay, so looking at everything we've talked about, this under-the-radar movement, the aggressive legal tactics, the efforts to overturn Sullivan, and all the harm being done to news organizations, what's the main thing we should be worried about?
The most worrying trend is that it's becoming easier for people and companies with a lot of money and power to use libel law as a way to silence anyone who criticizes them or tries to investigate their actions. It's not really about getting justice anymore, it's about silencing dissent.
Right, and this isn't just some abstract legal debate. It affects our ability to get accurate information and hold our leaders accountable.
Yeah, exactly. If it gets too risky for journalists to do their jobs because they're scared of getting sued, the free flow of information, which is crucial for a healthy democracy, will definitely be threatened.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big question you want our listeners to think about?
Think about what would happen if it suddenly became a lot easier to win a libel lawsuit. How would that affect journalists who want to investigate important but controversial stories? Would they be less willing to do that kind of reporting? How would it impact public debate? Would people be afraid to speak out? And what would it mean for the balance of power in our society? It's a really important question for all of us.
Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about. This has been a really eye-opening conversation about a topic that doesn't always get the attention it deserves. Thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. And for our listeners, if you found this deep dive into libel law and free speech informative, please consider subscribing to The Deep Dive for more in-depth discussions like this. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And be sure to share this episode with anyone you know who cares about free speech and critical thinking. You can find more information and links to the sources we used, including the book Murder the Truth, which was super helpful for our conversation today, in the show notes. And as always, keep thinking critically about the information you come across and the forces that might be trying to control it.
It's more important than ever.
It really is. Until next time, stay curious.